Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea with TPS, informal conversations with thought leaders in India and abroad. Today, our distinguished guest is Dr. Madhav Godbole, an eminent and renowned administrator and author who has written 26 books on public policy issues. He's a former Home Secretary, Secretary Justice, Secretary Petroleum and Natural Gas, Secretary Urban Development, and many others. He is known to have played a crucial role in many national issues. On top of that, among his other assignments included management of India's international borders. Mr. Godbole's latest book, India, a Federal Union of States, Fault Lines, Challenges and Opportunities, was brought to my attention by his publisher, Sri KPR Nair, who also happens to be my publisher too. He has published a few of my books. I'm grateful to Dr. Bole for joining this discussion on his book and related ideas. Welcome, Dr. Madhav Godbole.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, since we are speaking on the last day of 2021, New Year is just a few hours ahead of us. It will be interesting for our viewers to know your assessment of 2021 and your expectations and hopes for 2020.
Well, first thing which strikes me, not just for 21, but for the last 2-3 years, is the acute polarization in the country. I don't think at any time in the past the country was divided so completely, not just politically, but whether it is media, whether it is intellectuals, whether it is writings, whether it is social media, everywhere, there is a high degree of polarization. As a result, the issues are not looked at in totality, to look at the positives and the negatives and then to arrive at a conclusion, but largely based on one's ideology and expectations of what the government ought to be. The discussion seems to be centered around that kind of a concept which bothers me. As a result, I find that center-state relations, for example, are as bad today as they were during Indira Gandhi's time. There is total lack of communication at the political level between the center and the states. And a federal structure like India, as it is envisaged in the constitution, cannot really carry on with this kind of center and the states looking in the opposite directions. It is, for example, there is a lot of debate in Tamil Nadu on whether we should call it a center or whether we should call it a union. Now, this is, in a sense, this is a substantial point in this debate because center often has behaved as if it is dominating over the states. And that is a kind of a thing which we ought to do away with. And therefore, I'm looking forward to next year as an year in which there will be more amicable relations between the center and the states, and generally less polarization between the various groups of thinking in the country.
Well, I'm surprised as the viewers would be that you did not mention the pandemic even once.
Well, pandemic is only an excuse which we often give, but real issues are there which are not going to go away even if pandemic goes away. And therefore, I'm talking about the basic issues which are troubling me.
No, but didn't that dominate the thinking and actions of the government and the people during 2021? And aren't we all looking forward to a world without the pandemic?
Well, firstly, India's handling of the pandemic again has been largely polarized entirely. For example, there are some people who believe it has been done exceedingly well, There are others who believe it has been done exceedingly badly. And as a result, as you know, as a former foreign service officer, that this has very large implications for India's image abroad. In fact, it has taken a very large beating in terms of how India has been conducting its democracy and whether there is a democracy in India at all. In fact, there are people who are saying India is sliding from democracy along with the US. We are in good company in a sense, but yes, there is this talk about sliding from democracy. One can have different views on this subject, but yes, pandemic is a very major issue, but which should not make us lose sight of what are the basics which are bothering the country and which will have to be remedied as we go along.
But hasn't the world fundamentally changed after the advent of the pandemic? And can't we say that many of the things we saw were partially at least determined by this dreadful disease and the death of millions of people?
I'm not sure. To a certain extent, in terms of governance style, yes, there have been changes. And these have been changes in terms of more concentration of power in the central government, in terms of less democracy, or in terms of reducing the rights of people to express themselves, etc. In these terms, there has been a broad change. But otherwise, I don't think it has made a great deal of difference in terms of the way in which the countries or the world at large has managed itself.
So that's a refreshing thought. Coming back to your book, India, a Federal Union of States, Fault Lines, Challenges and Opportunities. The title itself is quite revolutionary. You quoted Dr. Rajendra Prasad as having said that it doesn't matter what you call our union or our country. It depends on how we manage their affairs. So taking that cue, I think you have virtually changed the description of it from Union of India in the Constitution to the Federal Union of States. And of course, talks about fault lines, etc. You're talking about the last 75 years as to how the Constitution has worked. But how would you justify such a change in the name of the country itself, of the nation itself?
At the outset, I should say that this is not a new name I'm giving. The Constitution itself has made it explicitly clear that we are not a federation, but we are a union of states. In fact, a specific mention of this has been made by Dr. Ambedkar in more than one of his speeches in the Constituent Assembly, in which it has been made clear that we are a union of states for two or three reasons. Firstly, because, as you know, states in the conventional sense of the term did not exist prior to independence. They were British drawn division of the country between administrative divisions of the country, and these were not states, and they did not have any powers of their own. Secondly, you had that at the time of independence, 554 princely states which came to India. And the integration of these states is a fascinating chapter which people are often not aware of. What was achieved over a period of 3 years, less than 3 years, by the then Home Minister Vallabhbhai Patel and Menon, P.P. Menon, was unbelievable. The country was transformed totally from the time as it was at the time of independence. And then the states, in some form or the other, came into being. These were not, again, states on any principles, but again, putting them together administratively convenient, etc. Because as you are aware, at that time between the states, there were customs barriers. We are not aware of, most of our readers today are not aware of what kind of a country we would have been if this situation had not been changed. And therefore, even the
way the British administered these states were were different in varied ways. You know, the power of the Maharajas and everything was that there was nothing uniform about all this.
Nothing uniform. It changed from uh, one princely state to another, one area to another. Whether it
Yeah.
was whether it was a governor's rule, states, provinces, or the others, smaller provinces, etc. And therefore, the situation was, in a sense, not not the one which conventionally person would describe it as states. And then when the constitution was framed, Article 3 of the constitution specifically gave powers to the center to decide what to do with these states. You can redraw their boundaries, you can make and unmake the states, you can convert a state into a union territory, you can convert a union territory into a state, and therefore, in a conventional description of a federation, this is not a federation in that sense, but as Ambedkar emphasized in his speech in the Constituent Assembly, this is a union of states with distinctive features of a federation. And what is the main feature of a federation? That is division of responsibilities between the center and the states, which is the seventh schedule, under which you have a central list, a state list, and a concurrent list. This effectively defines the federation. Therefore, Ambedkar said.
But where is the word unitary fits it? In some cases, you say that we are a union of states or a federation of states with some unitary characters.
Unitary character in the sense that there could be situations in which it could be converted into a unitary character in which center has the predominant position. The center takes the role, like for example in the president's rule, or in the case of emergency, financial emergency, or in the case of external aggression. All of these are the times in which the federal character will remain aside, will get subdued, and instead the role of the center will be preeminent, and which is what is built into the system of the constitution itself.
Right. So it is not unitary in normal times. That's what I thought.
That's right.
Of course, the difference we know between our states and the United States, where the states have much more freedom and much more independence, laws are different and so on. So that
because there were states at the time when the federation was formed. Here, there were no states when the federation was formed.
So they had some characteristics there already, which
that's right.
And so what you have identified as the two major fault lines in the last 75 years. One is the relationship between center and states, which you already touched upon. And the other is the issue of cashing. So we can discuss these two separately. And talking about center-state relations, one of the evident issues has been the relation between the governor and the state government. In fact, in Kerala today, there is a serious controversy going on.
Yeah.
It started off with the governor asserting certain things which he said he would not do or say, which was critical of the central government. That's how it started. And then he seemed to have, found a way to deal with this. He went along with the government in various statements, etc., which were given to him. And even in the universities, he followed the advice of the state government. But then suddenly, he has come up with this idea that he has himself been wrong in following these decisions. And now he feels that he was pressurized to take this. This looks like an unprecedented situation. There have been differences. But what is your take on this? How do you think this can be resolved?
As I have argued in the book, I believe that the institution of governor is anachronistic. It was not in keeping with the republican character of the country, of the nation that we were building up. It was drawn entirely from the British experience. In the British times, the governor has a distinct role in terms of making sure that what England wanted was implemented in practice in the country. Here in a democracy, with all the institutions of democracy which are given to you, there is no need for a governor. Firstly, how the governor should be appointed is something, and what the role of the governor ought to be has been commented upon repeatedly by a number of commissions and committees. Starting with Administrative Reforms Commission, then Sarkaria Commission, then again National Commission for working of the Constitution. Then you had again a Poochie Commission, and then you also have a authoritative judgment of the Supreme Court of 1979, which laid down the guidelines of what is a governor, what is his role, what is the center's role, and whether he is subordinate to the center in any way. None of these principles have been observed by any of the governments, irrespective of which political party was in power at the center. And therefore, we must realize that after 70, 75 years, with open eyes, we must realize that there are some things which are workable, which are not workable in the Indian system. And I would say governor's position or governor's office is one such institution which is not workable in the Indian system. I have shown, for example, article-wise powers which are given to the governor, which need not be given to the governor at all. And for example, convening a meeting of the legislature. Why do you require a governor? It can be a direct request by the chief minister or the prime minister to the speaker. You don't require a governor at all. For example, why do you require a governor's speech at the first session of the legislature in a year?
You have to say those things.
And then there is a controversy on what the governor should say and what the governor should not say. It has to be realized that governor has no independent existence. Governor represents the state, and therefore whatever the state cabinet gives him as a draft, it is his responsibility to read whether it is critical of the central government or otherwise. But as you know, there have been series of cases in which there has been serious discordance between the center and the governor on the basis of the governor's speech. I've argued in the book that the governor must say, this is not my speech, this is the speech of the state government. I'm making the speech on behalf of the state government. I'm laying down before people what the session will do, what kind of a program it will have, etc. And therefore, that is the function of the governor's speech. But again, it has become controversial. Again, as you must have seen in Maharashtra, we have now a controversy on speaker's election. I do not understand why governor's permission is required for holding a speaker's election. It is entirely something which is dependent on the state assembly to do. But the governor has been given responsibility. For example, in Maharashtra, you must be aware, Maharashtra and Gujarat, when the question of regional differences between in the development of various regions came up, a new article was introduced in the constitution to say governors will have special responsibility. And that article begins by saying, irrespective of what the constitution contains otherwise, because it is a democratic constitution otherwise. But in this case, both Maharashtra and Gujarat governors can be given special powers as if they are running the state, they are running those regions in terms of development. And therefore, now, for example, a peculiar situation. I was one of those who, as a Home Secretary, strongly opposed to setting up of development boards because this is against the basics of democracy. The Home Minister at that time was opposed, but again, central government under P.V. Narasimha Rao came under the influence of the state legislature, and these boards were created. Now we have them for last 20-25 years. There is hardly anything to write home about. But the process, what you have done is you have shown lack of respect or lack of confidence in the democratic institutions and have instead given those powers to the governor. Therefore, it is a difficult decision to take, but I think time has come when we must take a decision to abolish the posts of the governor, and which is what I have strongly argued in the book.
Has there been any proposal by any of those commissions that it should be abolished?
No, this is too revolutionary for any commission, for any commission, government appointed commission to make such a recommendation. No, it hasn't been.
And have you got any thoughts on governor's role in the universities?
Again, you see the experience in Bihar election, for example. In Bihar, for example, the then governor made a number of appointments of vice chancellors which were severely criticized for, in fact, charges were made that corruption charges were leveled against them.
Being recalled now, yes.
And and it went right up to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said that those decisions were wrong. And it is not for the first time that this question has come up. In fact, as you might be aware, a serious question was raised in a seminar in a judicial academy in Bhopal, whether decisions taken by the governor in his capacity as a chancellor of the university will be protected by his position as a governor under the constitution. And there was difference of opinion, but there was a large section of people who believed that he cannot have any protection for any of the decisions which he takes as a chancellor of the university, because it has nothing to do with his position as a governor. Again, this arose at the time when the constitution was made because of fear that the elected governments may not do proper justice to the educational system and might bring in politics. And therefore, let us keep the governor as somebody who will supervise over the position, etc. But as the experience has shown, this is not really justified. And if the government does not behave properly or misbehaves in respect of educational institutions, the government can be hauled up in the legislature or in the parliament. Of course, it is another matter that both the legislature and the parliaments are not non-functional these days. But that is a unfortunate part of our democracy.
But in a case where the governor says, I'm not the chancellor anymore and refuse to see papers, it's a kind of crisis, isn't it? Of course, the legislature can decide to appoint another chancellor.
Well, you have both the situations. In Kerala, you have a governor who says, I'm not the chancellor. In Maharashtra, you have a governor who says, I am a chancellor and I will not permit my powers to be diluted in any way, as the state government is trying to do.
No, he is saying that indirectly. He's saying not because he wants to, want the chancellor. He's saying that I'm constrained by all these interference by the state, and therefore he's incapable of function.
But whether governor should call it a state government's asking him to look into something as an interference at all is my question. Because in a democracy, it is the elected government which should have the supreme authority to decide what it wants to do in a state. There is no reason at all for the governor to feel that it is an interference. How can elected government be said to be interfering in the role of the governor? Because governor has been given a role which ought not to have been given.
No, but the logic is that governor is normally a very highly respected gentleman, educated, experienced, political wisdom. So a person like that as chancellor, more as a ceremonial head than anything else, must have been a thoughtful idea, I feel. And his being there also restrains the political, interference of the government in the universities, because that is a reality. I know it personally that most
theoretically, what you say is right. But if you look at last 75 years, the kinds of governors who have been appointed by various governments at the center, none of them have followed the recommendations made by any one of these commissions. For example, B.K. Nehru, who was a governor in more than one state, in his autobiography, he has written, transferring of governors is something which is anachronistic. It is a constitutional authority cannot be transferred from one state to another state, but you have effectively converted them into civil servants by transferring the governors, because minister and the chief minister and the governor do not get along with each other. Therefore, the governor is transferred, because you cannot transfer the chief minister. And therefore, you have a very peculiar situation. And if the guidelines laid down or suggested by these people, commissions and committees, including the Supreme Court, we would not have been in this state. For example, whether it was Congress government or whether UPA government or NDA government, persons who are highly political and party workers have been appointed as governors. This is not what was contemplated.
That all governments have done.
Pardon?
All governments have done that. It's a sinecure for politicians to get a place to have.
That is why I said one must understand and one must accept that some things are not workable. Everything is not according to textbook. There are some things which work, which politically they don't work. For example, another thing which I have talked about in the book is Interstate Council. Very good idea, because you cannot really have a federation without such a deliberative institution to look at problems of the center and the states and deliberate them, discuss them and find amicable solutions. But over last 70, 75 years, we have found that this is just not workable. So why not accept that something which was good on paper, looks good on paper, and which was recommended or incorporated in the constitution for good reasons, but is not workable. And therefore, let us think in terms of alternatives.
Okay, turning to your other major issue that you discussed, that is Jammu and Kashmir integration and the related issues. All of us are familiar with the long story. Some of you, of course, know better than us. But in my view, its external dimension has been more significant in my own experience of 37 years in the foreign service, because it has kind of influenced our taking of our position in various issues around the world. We always think, will this apply to Kashmir? That would be our first instinct as diplomats. And then try to safeguard that by inserting a word here or inserting a word there, even the question of self-determination. But I was surprised that you say that this is fundamental to India's own existence, what's gone on in Kashmir. How would you justify that?
Firstly, as you know, partition was based on two-nation theory, based purely on Muslim religion as a nation. And this was one case, a Muslim majority state, question whether it can become a workable, integral part of India or not. And one of the reasons why Pandit Nehru was keen on retaining this, apart from the fact that he belonged to Kashmir, but according to me, that was subsidiary. More important was, to his philosophy of a secular India, this was a unique opportunity to show that yes, it can successfully work in a situation in India. And therefore, I have devoted, some people will say, too large a part of my book to Kashmir, but I wanted to bring out that this is an important aspect for secular India, both domestically and internationally. Internationally, of course, it has become a point on which we went wrong in several ways, as you yourself have written about and talked about, including our going to the United Nations. And going to the United Nations, not charging Pakistan as an aggressor, but merely saying that the
Dispute.
tribals are coming
That's
through.
chapter 6 and not chapter 7.
Yeah, that's right. And
They make a mistake like that. Unbelievable, right?
and Nehru justified it, saying,
Yes,
I
I
do
saw.
not want Kashmir to be penalized and Pakistan to be penalized unnecessarily uh, by way of sanctions, etc., if it was to be declared as an aggressor.
Yes, sir.
It is the whole question of Kashmir has been handled very, very badly by successive governments, particularly in the initial years. Where a very series of mistakes were made. In fact, I have counted 17 of them. I have said where some of them are mistakes, some of them are blunders, as one would say it uh, 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 on the background. That this is something which has landed us in this kind of a situation, and therefore now to say right from beginning, Pakistan was keen only on the valley. It was not keen on Jammu or Ladakh or any other parts. In fact, Nehru himself was brought out. Nehru himself was conscious that he should not leave this as his legacy, Kashmir problem as his legacy. And Gundevia has brought out in his book that 6 or 7 times discussions were held with Pakistan between 61 62 to find out whether there can be a division of Jammu and Kashmir region between India and Pakistan. But Bhutto was keen that valley and valley only because it was a matter of prestige for them. Therefore, this is something you raised a question earlier whether it was important enough. Some parts of the country it is not important, but for a country's image as country's constitution, country's philosophy, country's ideology, what India stands for, idea of India is linked with the question of Kashmir, and therefore it has to be looked at in that larger perspective. And therefore, I believe that every effort must be made to bridge the gap, to increase the bondage between valley and the country at large. And therefore, that 12-point program, which I have talked about, yes, several of those things have been talked about from time to time, but not seriously enough politically. The whole question is politically we have not dealt with this matter in a manner in which we ought to have done. For example,
Dr. Godbole, there is a theory that Prime Minister Nehru really did not want the POK because of the difference of culture and Muslim philosophy in Kashmir and in POK are different. So he probably did not want a situation where the Kashmirians would be lost in the larger area of POK because they are more fundamentalist Muslims, etc. Do you think that's a right not information that we have that Prime Minister was not really keen on POK to be part of India?
No, I don't think so, because I don't think he looked at it from the point of view of Kashmiri or otherwise. He was more concerned with settling the issue. Settling the issue with Pakistan, since they were keen on getting Kashmir and therefore giving a part of Kashmir to them. Interestingly enough, as I have brought out in the book, Sheikh Abdullah, on whom Nehru relied so much, did not have as much influence outside the valley as it was claimed. He was more a leader of Kashmir Valley and partly of Jammu, but not of the remaining part of POK. And therefore, he himself was never keen on that remaining as a part of India. Secondly, the question of Nehru's policy at that time, as I see, largely guided by his intrinsic faith that Kashmir can be retained with India only if Sheikh Abdullah is with India. And I have a problem with that.
Just the Maharaja's thought.
Yeah, I have a problem with the proposition, as I've argued in the book, that the Kashmir acceded to India the moment Maharaja signed that accession letter. And under the act, that moment, Kashmir became a part of India. But Nehru gave an impression all along, including to the United Nations, that Kashmir is with India only because Sheikh Abdullah has agreed to be with India. In fact, it put us in a very, very wrong box, and there was no reason to do it. Therefore, all subsequent actions, later on, of course, he repented on relying so much on Sheikh Abdullah, and then he went to the other extreme of
Getting him arrested.
detaining him for nearly 11 years. Again,
Yes.
which gave us a very, very bad name internationally. That it was Sheikh Abdullah who was being charged, but as Guardian said in its editorial, it is India which is in the dock. That kind of an impression which was created abroad. Of course, the role of the British, as you know more than in anybody else, the role of the British was very dubious.
Mountbatten's advice, as you
Absolutely, including that of the government itself. They always wanted Kashmir to go to Pakistan. There was no doubt whatsoever on this subject. And all their effort in the United Nations was to create as many problems for India as possible. And
the plebiscite was an obvious case
but
of trying to do something different from what the other states had done. There was no question of a plebiscite anywhere else.
Yeah, that's right. And plebiscite, in any case, Jinnah never believed in plebiscite. As you know, when it came to the question of merger of the provincial, merger of the princely states in Pakistan with Pakistan, he never agreed to plebiscite anywhere. We agreed, at least in Kashmir, or we agreed in Hyderabad or in Junagadh, but Jinnah never agreed, and he never believed in plebiscite. This was only a talking point internationally. It was a talking point, and therefore,
interestingly, Pakistan itself does not believe in a plebiscite anymore.
Yeah.
So, but they are the ones who are asking for plebiscite without fulfilling the two conditions before that.
Exactly.
In the existing situations. So, but anyway, we have now come to a stage where this has become an imbroglio. It's very difficult for us to get out of it. And Article 370 abrogation was a very important factor in this, because I have spoken to Farooq Abdullah. He used to come to the UN very often. And he thought 370 was fundamental to Jammu and Kashmir being part of it. He said, 370 goes, we go. This has been his position right from the beginning. I'm talking about 20 years ago. So how did that happen? Because it was supposed to be a temporary measure and everybody understood it. So removing it was very logical. But the later decision that we also want POK, and that seems unreasonable, which you yourself seem to indicate, because we had always told everybody that LOC is acceptable to us after the Simla agreement. You know, formally we have a position in the parliament that the whole of Jammu and Kashmir, including POK and Baltistan, are all part of India, etc. But we had conceded to the international community many, many times that LOC, as outlined in the Simla agreement, is accepted, we will be happy. So you say that this might be just a bargaining chip that we are building.
Sure.
Make that LOC to become a standby, a pullback arrangement kind of thing. You make a big demand and then be satisfied with the LOC. Is that the only thing, or is there something more serious about it?
Let me first talk about Article 370. That's the question which you raised first. There's a tremendous misunderstanding on what Article 370 is about. People loosely talk about as if Article 370 gave special dispensation to Jammu and Kashmir, which is factually incorrect. If you interpret the Constitution liberally, irrespective of what is contained in the Constitution, it is another matter. But if you look at all the papers of discussions at that time, the only reason why, and I have said it in my book, the only reason why Article 370 had to be incorporated was because of Farooq Abdullah.
Yeah.
Window dressing was done by the government by saying there is a war on, we are already in the United Nations, we cannot really have take a decision on the integration of Kashmir, etc. This is all hogwash, according to me. The real reason was all 554 states, all of them agreed to integrate with India, signing the agreement, signing the accession agreement first, and then integrated, as I said earlier during the discussion uh, with Vallabhbhai Patel. It was only Farooq Abdullah who said, we cannot do it till you have an agreement of our Constituent Assembly. And therefore, step by step, Sheikh Abdullah was the one who misled Nehru and his cabinet to agree to all his demands. In fact, the special powers given to the special status given to Jammu and Kashmir was not in Article 370. Article 370 merely said that till such time as the things return to normal, etc., because that was window dressing clearly. And I have said so. This was nothing but window dressing. And if it was to give any special powers, this article, there would not have been a provision to abolish that article. It would not have been also said that it is a temporary article. All other articles in that section are special articles. This is the only temporary provision. Why temporary provision? Because it was supposed to be only till such time as the things are sorted out and complete integration of Jammu and Kashmir takes place. But Sheikh Abdullah never wanted that to take place because he wanted sultanate of his own in Jammu and Kashmir. And I have argued this at length to say that there is enough evidence to show this is what he wanted. Either make me a protectorate of India or let it be a sultanate so that I will be a ruler for life.
That will be only Srinagar. He doesn't want Jammu. He didn't want Jammu.
He was prepared to give up Jammu.
Right.
In fact, I have quoted some of the letters which he has written to say that areas of Jammu, area in Jammu can go to India. His whole interest was in making it a sultanate and being a ruler for life. Now, quite frankly, we were talking about plebiscite on one side, and at the same time, we were talking about giving a constituent assembly for Jammu and Kashmir. I consider it a contradiction. If there is to be a plebiscite, there is no need at all for a constituent assembly. Again, Sheikh Abdullah has written in his memoirs that Delhi was totally opposed to it, but again he pressurized. And he pressurized and made Government of India agree to Jammu and Kashmir having a constituent assembly. And again, you read his speech in the Constituent Assembly. It reads as if he's a sovereign. It is a sovereign nation, and he is addressing a sovereign nation. Therefore, my whole purpose in writing somewhat extensively on Jammu and Kashmir is to do away with large misunderstanding on this subject or misreading of history on this subject, and particularly people abroad must read what is the reality before they make judgments in terms of what is right or what is wrong about Jammu and Kashmir. And therefore, yes, I have devoted 2 chapters of the book because I believe that retaining Jammu and Kashmir with India, and just not physically retaining it, but bonding of that area with India is important in terms of we as India as a country. India as a nation.
We have gone to the extent of saying that we have integrated Kashmir, but not the minds of the Kashmiris.
That is right. That is right. So constitutionally, we are integrated, but not in terms of minds.
Well, then what is the solution? I know your 12-point solution, but what is crucial? Where can it break? Where can the Gordian knot be cut, as it were?
Well, some things I don't think any government, whether it was UPA earlier or NDA now, are prepared to look at some of these matters seriously enough. As for
But
example,
in Agra, did we not go very close to an agreement?
Andhra is a separate chapter altogether because, as I have written in the book, creation of Andhra itself raises
No,
the
no, I'm talking about Agra, the
Telangana.
Agra meeting, Vajpayee and Parvez Musharraf. Well,
Oh, you mean, yeah, that's right.
Come to an understanding on the border.
At that time, I do not know what, there is no authentic record available. In fact, um, surprisingly, no papers pertaining to Jammu and Kashmir have been made public yet. Everything is under wraps. And therefore, even Foreign Secretary Gundevia had to write a title of his book was Outside Archives. So, I mean, quite frankly, I see no reason why people ought not to see what was the position of various people and why decisions were taken.
Two issues on which there is a lot of lack of clarity. One, of course, the Simla agreement, whether it was true that there was an understanding with Bhutto that he would come back and sign an agreement which solved the Kashmir problem. And this, of course, there is no clarity, but there are various stories. And second is whether the idea that there could be an open border and thus resolve the problem of Jammu and Kashmir. So these two things are just floating as theories. And of course, on Simla, you have felt that we were kind of fooled by President Prime Minister Bhutto, in a sense, in spite of all the capability and brilliance that we have. And in Agra, the rumor is that Mr. Advani went and stopped it, otherwise something would have been signed. So what do you think of these bits of information which is not really well established, circumstantial evidence-wise?
Again, since no authentic record is to be made available to you and me, we have to rely on what people who were involved in it at that time have written or have spoken about. I am referring to the writings of the then Secretary to Prime Minister, who clearly, and I have quoted him, who clearly said that there was an understanding that Bhutto will go back and make his country agree to converting LOC into an international border. I'm not able to understand if Bhutto went back on his commitment. What is it that stopped Indira Gandhi and later governments to clearly pronounce in the parliament that there was this kind of an understanding and Pakistan has gone back on it? Till this date, the government of India has not said so. I'm not able to understand why. In fact, I have quoted what Vajpayee at one time said publicly on this subject, and then a privilege motion was raised against him in the House as to why he was giving out state secrets. And he said, because he had referred to what he had seen in the MEA papers. And the then speaker, again, very inexplicable, people in authority, the manner in which they talk and behave. The then speaker said, this is not an issue important enough for adjournment motion in the House. It can be discussed at a later date. And therefore, nobody was interested and the matter never came up for discussion. In fact, I would have said this issue ought to have been discussed in the parliament and finality ought to have been brought on this question, whether Bhutto was agreeable at that time and whether he went back on that commitment.
The result of it is that present-day Pakistan does not even recognize the Simla Agreement. Anything that you quote from the Simla Agreement, they will say, "Oh, we don't know about the Simla Agreement." So that is how it has come about. Even on the fact that only bilaterally these discussions will be held, they have been violating it every day. And so if you tell them about Shimla, they say, what Shimla? And that is how they are approaching it.
But as I have my own assessment I have given in the book, that the whole Simla agreement discussions were handled very, very badly. And only if for people like Jagjivan Ram and Y.V. Chavan, if they had guts enough to speak out their mind, this agreement would not have gone through.
But that was left to the Pandit lobby.
Yeah, exactly. But
Entourage.
again, what was the role of Advani at the time when Musharraf made that proposal, etc., is something which has never come out. These things ought not to remain secret. This is larger national interest. And after 75 years, we are mature enough to take things or understand things in perspective. Why is it that these things are not made public?
And on the POK being recovered, do you have any views? You know what you have said in the book. But...
No, in fact, my own view is internationally, you will never be permitted to take over POK. And I have quoted, for example, what United States government.
People told Aksar, I think.
Yeah, no, and again, what United States government had told our ambassador.
Yes, that's right.
At that time, to say under no circumstances.
B.K. Nehru?
Yeah, I think it was B.K. Nehru. That under no circumstances can you lay any claim on any part of POK. Right. That was just an indication at that time. Today's situation will be even worse. And British, in any case, did not want us to get Kashmir, and therefore, I don't think you will have any international support to go in and take over POK or to claim POK. Leave aside China. China talking about the huge area which was given to them in 1962, and we didn't.
Yes, why is it that we did not raise an objection at that time?
We didn't raise any objection. These are interesting parts of history which future generations are going to blame all of us.
No, but in that sense, then there is no real hope of a resolution.
No, I don't believe so. There is a scope. There is a scope. For example, one of the first things which will make a substantial difference is to withdraw army from the civilian areas in Srinagar, in the valley. This is something which I have been talking about for a long time. Again, you have now a controversy in Nagaland about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. Again, I have been saying that it will be impossible for you as a country to dilute the provisions of Armed Forces Special Powers Act, because it will demoralize the army and the armed forces altogether if they do not have that protection, because they are working in very unusual circumstances, very difficult circumstances. The only way to get out of this problem is to make sure that you don't deploy army in these conditions, that you find political solutions. You deal with it politically. You deal with it with the help of civilian police, with BSF, CRPF, that kind of central organizations, but not army.
Well, you are caught in the two, in the sense that the presence of army itself is a provocation, but it is necessary to keep law and order. And at the same time, we cannot say that the problem is over.
That is why I have proposed again, I hope it can be tried one of these days, that an open offer should be given by the government to all political parties in the valley, that we will withdraw army from all civilian areas for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, if you undertake not to have any kind of disturbance in this area. And let army take care of the border and the areas nearer the border, but let the civilian areas be left to the police to handle. Why is it not possible for us to do it?
Well, it's a matter of strengthening the police and reforming the police. That's another.
Strengthening the police, reforming the police, yes.
You have mentioned. And then these other 5 major fault lines, finally. I think we are running out of our time already. Like linguistic states, and rising of subnationalism, then requirements, Frankenstein requirements, official language. But these are issues which can be handled, don't you think? Not, of course, religion and politics. That is something which is very difficult to separate.
I don't think these issues are also easy to handle. Firstly, we are not even prepared to talk about these issues. Whether there should be, for example, state should be permitted to pass laws to restrict employment to people within those states and to say 75%, 80%, 90% of all jobs will go only to people domiciled in that state is something which is totally against the provisions of the Constitution.
Yeah, we call it Frankenstein law.
Yeah, and it is going on state after state. It is not as if one single state is doing it, but there is no response from it from any of the national parties. The question of
official language.
Pardon?
Official language issue.
Official language is potentially a very explosive issue, but its intensity
has been contained to a certain
intensity has gone down with Hindi-speaking areas now taking more to English, and which I have quoted substantial statistics on that account, both in rural areas, semi-urban areas, etc. And therefore, at the same time, the states in the south also need to take a little more reasonable position on the subject.
No, Kerala has always been very reasonable. It is Tamil Nadu which is creative.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is either our language or nothing else. It is as if it is language which alone is the existence of that state. That is not the correct way to go about it. And even if that is your stand as a politician today, don't inflict it on the younger generation. Let them learn the languages. Why stop them? For example, Tamil Nadu has stopped national schools from being established because they will teach Hindi.
Yes, even the policy in the national new economic education policy, have been objecting to the Hindi aspect, and that has been diluted for their sake.
Somebody asked a question to one of the members of parliament in Chennai airport. Can you not speak Hindi? Then how are you an Indian? And a big offense was taken, which I have quoted there. This is something which is not to be made a political issue. This is something which a constable at the airport asking this kind of a question. He is not a minister, or he is not an intellectual who is speaking. He is somebody who is asking this question because his understanding is limited. But we are not prepared to get out of this mindset of India as a nation. And
so
therefore,
that's a very old mindset. I remember people in Fiji, for example, who were mostly went from UP and so on.
Yeah.
They could not think of an Indian not speaking Hindi.
Yeah, quite right.
So I had to take a crash course and make speeches in Hindi to be accepted as Indian High Commissioner.
Right.
So they themselves spoke English.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Godbole, for this great opportunity for me to talk to you. And I'm sure our viewers will also find it extremely useful. And I'm sure that will also encourage them to buy your book and read it, because I would consider it a very, very valuable book, which should be reference material for a lot of people in the field. And you have done a masterly job of analyzing it, compiling it, formulating it. So it's an excellent book, I'm sure. It will be used widely. My congratulations.